Worldbuilding is one of those elements in fiction that is unique to sci-fi and fantasy, and its many subgenres. And for many of us, it is what initially draws us into the genre. Some people get drawn in because of the worldbuilding of some other author's story. Others simply get drawn in at the prospect of worldbuilding their own setting for a story they want to tell. And while I would definitely encourage every aspiring sci-fi and fantasy author to put effort into their worldbuilding, there is a major pitfall that must be warned against. This is a pitfall that has chewed up and spit out more new fantasy writers than I could ever care to count. It's something easy to avoid if you know what to look for, but also easy to fall for if you're not prepared. I'm talking, of course, about Worldbuilder Disease. It's something every fantasy writer must be prepared to deal with, and something you must approach with some tact to avoid falling into. So what is Worldbuilder Disease? Is it all that bad? And how can one avoid the traps and pitfalls surrounding Worldbuilder Disease in general? But before we jump in, remember to please hit the like button. Engagement is the main metric YouTube uses to push out my videos to new people. And short of leaving a comment, the like button is the next best thing to tell YouTube that it should show this video to more people. It's easy, it's free, and you'll be doing a massive service to this channel and community. If you really like the channel, then consider subscribing as well, so that you don't miss follow-up videos when they go live. Before we look into Worldbuilder Disease, we must establish what worldbuilding actually is. And while I'm sure 90% or more of you already know what it is, it would be helpful to the very new writers potentially watching if we just briefly clarified our definition of it. Worldbuilding is, at its base level, building the setting for your story. It ranges from creating the nations and cultures of your world to the geography, topology, history, and even laws of physics of the world your story is set in. Basically, worldbuilding is the act of building, well, your world. Now, for a fantasy or sci-fi author, you may think that world building is incredibly important, that unless you have your world building in order, your story risks massive derailment. Now, I wouldn't be so dramatic over the importance of world building, but yes, it is quite important to get these details right. So, sensing that, many new writers set aside time to just build the world for their story. Some may even look at fantasy authors like J.R.R. Tolkien and see that he spent decades just building Middle-earth. All of this, the importance, the pressure, and the examples you see around you would make you think that worldbuilding should be something that you spend significant time on. Unfortunately, many new writers make the mistake of thinking that significant time equals all the time. This is what we call Worldbuilder Disease. Being so focused on worldbuilding and so entranced by the feeling of building your setting that you end up spending more time worldbuilding than you do writing your actual story. When you spend so much time worldbuilding that you never even spend time writing, or your time spent writing is incredibly small in comparison, then you know you have Worldbuilder Disease. Worldbuilder Disease is a problem in that it takes time away from actually writing the story, which is the most important part. But the thing is, unless you're told otherwise, you'll likely not realize that this is a problem. You're supposed to do world building, right? J.R.R. Tolkien spent decades doing it, and look how his writing career turned out. And that's the true problem I have with Worldbuilder Disease. Not only are there detailed reasons for why you should spend a lot of time world building, but those reasons often are incredibly valid. You do actually need to spend time world building. You do actually need to spend time on the background details in order to start writing the story. The reasons are, for lack of a better term, completely reasonable. But that doesn't mean it's not a problem. A sailor can prepare for a voyage for many years, but it means nothing if he doesn't actually set sail. A chef can plan out his meals and the ingredients he'll use, but it means nothing if he doesn't actually cook. In the same vein, all your world building and planning means nothing if you don't actually write. You should world build, yes, but you can't do it so much that it eats into your writing time. But let's say you do set aside time to write. Let's even say that you write a fair amount each day on top of all your world building. Then it should be fine, right? As long as you spend time writing, it's not a problem, is it? Unfortunately, things are really so simple. You see, Worldbuilder's disease is a precursor to a major problem that a lot of new writers have with their writing: information dumps. Think about it. You spend months, maybe even years, building the world and magic system of your story. You spend countless hours tinkering with the smallest details to get the world you've built just right. So if you've spent so many hours pushing and working just to get your world building in order, you're gonna want to use it, right? Yeah, that's exactly where the problem comes in. When you world build, especially when you do a lot of it, you're going to be drawn into using it. There's a very fine line between revealing your world building through narrative and just dumping information on the reader. World building is like an iceberg. The part that sticks out of the surface is what's on the page. The part that you can see and infer underneath the surface is what is implied by what's on the page. You allude to what could be under the surface, but you don't bury your reader under a mountain of info dumps. Worldbuilder's disease not only creates a massive iceberg for you to manage, but it also tempts you into dumping that information all over the reader's head. The sunk cost fallacy of all the work you're putting in will urge you to tell your reader a lot more than they ever have to know. So now that we know what the main issue is with Worldbuilder's disease, how do we stop it? How do we prevent the pitfalls of falling to Worldbuilder's disease when you're busy building the world for your story? The first and most crucial thing you'll want to do is set yourself a structure to how you write. And by structure, I don't mean becoming more of an outline writer. If you're naturally a discovery writer, then doing an outline will just cause problems for you. Also, if you haven't seen my video on outline and discovery writers yet, I highly recommend you check it out. Anyway, when I say you should have a structure, I mean you should have some kind of rule when it comes to writing and world building. For me, my rule is that I only world build what is absolutely necessary for a given story, then I include the world building as I write. Other writers may decide to write the story first and then get the world building done. The point is that you need to set a structure to where you only world build or only write. If you world build while the story is still being written, then you run the risk of info dumping or world building so much that you end up with Worldbuilder's disease. Whatever structure works for you, just make sure that you do one first and only then do you go on to the other. Remember, you can always go back and edit when necessary, but try to separate these two tasks when doing the initial writing of the first draft. Also, I found that it helps if you can set some goals around world building. As an example, I have an extensive list of the things I need to world build. My goal is to work on one of these points every day, and that I don't get to add more detail to the list until I've finished it and can see what's missing. Try to find a way to incorporate daily goals into your structuring since it can keep you motivated as well. Ultimately, however, you will get to a point where you've done all the basic world building for your story. Oh sure, you could do more and try and iron out some further details. Sure, there are still some details that might be beneficial to have worked out before you start writing. But at some point, when you have enough established to tell the story, just write. That's probably the best advice I can give on the subject. If you focus on just writing once you're ready, then you're on the right track. Odds are that there will be a bunch of things that you weren't aware you'll need to world build until you actually get to it in the story. And more likely than not, there will be things you already world built but will never need or may actually have to change completely. Just write and allow the story to tell you what details you still have to work out. Then when you go back and edit, you can add those details in. But in order to truly overcome Worldbuilder's disease, you must eventually just write. Thank you very much for watching. I sincerely appreciate all your time and attention. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like since that's one of the biggest metrics YouTube looks at when recommending it. And if you'd like to see more, please hit that subscribe button so that you can be notified of future videos. Take care and we'll talk again very soon.